It's great to have you joining us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. I'm host Carrie Freeman, coming to you in August of 2023 from Atlanta in the Muskogee Creek Territory in the Piedmont region in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountain Range. Today, we're going to be talking about restoring rights to the wild bison of North America to live and migrate in and outside of Yellowstone National Park. Our guests are Mike Mease and Dallas Gudgell. They're from an advocacy group, the Buffalo Field Campaign, who have been supporting the Yellowstone wild bison for decades and stopping their slaughter. Let me tell you a bit about them. The Buffalo Field Campaign is the only group working both in the field and in the policy arenas to stop the harassment and slaughter of America's last wild buffalo. Formalized as a nonprofit in 1997, they also protect the natural habitat of wild free-roaming bison and other native wildlife, and stand with First Nations to honor the sacredness of wild buffalo. The primary goal of the Buffalo Field Campaign is to create permanent year-round protection for bison and the ecosystem they depend on, including respect for the migratory needs of this long-exploited and clearly endangered species. Their website is full of info and action items at buffalofieldcampaign.org. One of our guests, Mike Mease, is co-founder of the Buffalo Field Campaign and serves as their campaign coordinator, training hundreds of volunteers in buffalo protection over the decades. He's also an award-winning videographer of wildlife documentaries, even working as an undercover filmmaker for Native Forest Network, Bear Watch, and Greenpeace. Our other guest, David Gudgell, serves on the board of directors from Buffalo Field Campaign. In his hometown on the Fort Peck Reservation in Montana, he's worked as an environmental scientist for his tribal government and was chief of the local volunteer fire department. For over 30 years, Dallas has worked closely with elected officials on issues involving education, indigenous concerns, climate justice, human rights, and environmental protection and conservation. He's worked for the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality and conservation NGOs. Welcome, Dallas and Mike.
Thanks for having us.
Hi.
Now, what got you guys interested in helping the wild bison so many years ago and making it such a big part of your life?
Well, the catalyst of us starting this was I grew up an Army brat, and I picked Montana as my home, and I went to the University of Montana and helped start a nonprofit in 1990 called Cold Mountain Cold Rivers. We did environmental and human rights documentaries, and also got into guerrilla media, sneaking into places. And throughout that process in the mid 90s, we started to hear that right in our state, there was this bison slaughter that was going on. And, you know, a little context of the importance of the Yellowstone herd. We all know there used to be 30 to 60 million buffalo that roam continent North America. The conquerors killed them down to about what they believe was 23 animals left. We're in an area that is now known as Pelican Valley. They sent the U.S. Cavalry to stand guard for a year and a half, making sure this last herd did not get eliminated by poachers. And then we formed the first national park, Yellowstone National Park, to give the bison, in the parallel of the Native Americans, their reservation on Yellowstone National Park. So now everyone brags that there's great restoration of the bison because there's over 600,000 in the United States. But what people don't understand is all but about 10,000 of those animals are beefalo. They're mixed with the cattle bovine gene and raised like cattle. And physically, you can't tell a difference. But the uniqueness of the Yellowstone herd is what I refer to as ancient knowledge. They know how to be buffalo. They migrate. They do all the things the buffalo used to do. But of course, Yellowstone is not ideal habitat. It's high elevation plateau that traditionally gets some of the deepest snowfall in the lower 48 states. And so they have to migrate out of Yellowstone Park in the severe winters to reach food to be able to survive. And that's when the problem begins. The fight is over a disease that the cattle gave to all of our wildlife out here in Yellowstone, called brucellosis. And the disease really has never been transferred by the buffalo other than a Texas A&M laboratory experiment. And in the wild, it's never happened. The elk do and have redundantly transmitted the disease, but the prejudice solely lies on the buffalo. And it's because the Montana Department of Livestock is in charge of this issue. And that since they call the shots, draw the management plan, I mean, these guys not only have no education in wildlife management, wildlife biology, they also have the ultimate conflict of interest, yet they're put in charge. So we fight for the rights of the buffalo to be a wildlife recognized as a wildlife species, able to leave the park and be treated like we treat all other wildlife. But as long as the livestock industry are calling all the shots and making all the rules, we are stuck in this redundant box. And of course, I would never be so arrogant as a white man to have started this group without having leadership from the honor of mine was Rosalie Little Thunder, a traditional Lakota elder I started this with. And so we've always had Native guidance, Native involvement to create the change, because as Rosalie always told me, I come from a nation that calls itself Tatanka Oyate, and the closest that translates to your language is Buffalo Nation. And these animals that I love so much are not animals to her and her people. They're her relatives, and that's how sacred they are.
Wow. And Dallas, can you tell us a little bit about your interest in bison?
Well, I've known about the Buffalo Field Campaign since its inception as well, from a distance, and was interested. I knew some volunteers from Boise, Idaho, which is where I'm at. And at the time, I think I was working for in another environmental NGO. So I've been aware of it and followed it right along. In the last few years, I would say beginning 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, my mother happened to be on a tribal elder. I come from the Fort Peck, Assiniboine and Sioux Reservation of northeastern Montana. And my mother served as one of the elders on the elders program, a guidance program, which was highly involved in the local restoration of buffalo on my reservation at Fort Peck.
Great.
So I got even more keenly interested, knowing that she is an advisor for restoring buffalo on my reservation, which oddly enough was one of the main pastures is in the McDonald Breaks, and that was named after my great-grandfather, James McDonald. And so that's where he homesteaded. And that's where the herd was roaming around along the Poplar River on the Fort Peck Reservation. And so shortly after that, I became even more interested and decided to become a board member, and have kind of been rolled up my sleeves and have taken some roles in working to get some things done for bison. So that's how I originally got started, from years ago to today, where I'm knee deep in it now.
That's awesome. Well, I want to say I'm so overdue on having the Buffalo Field Campaign on my radio show, as I remember reading your newsletter as far back as the 1990s when I lived in Florida. And I remember writing letters to officials to stop the bison slaughter. And I've received your newsletter ever since. And every time I read it, I get all fired up about stopping the cattle industry and the government officials from continuing to unfairly persecute the wild bison. Can you tell us some of the Buffalo Field Campaign's achievements in protecting the rights of wild bison?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a slow, hard road, but there have been a few achievements throughout the years, without a doubt. Probably the biggest one, we had a governor that actually cared about the bison, and some of the central herd, which is the original herd of buffalo, they migrate every year out to this national forest area known as Horse Butte. And he granted year-round habitat out there for the animals. And of course, there's certain amount of numbers they can't exceed, etc. But it's a breakthrough, and finally letting them to come out onto their calving grounds at least.
Is that your current governor or a past governor?
No, unfortunately, that was our current governor. I think he's more into killing wolves and destroying our wildlife versus being an advocate for them. And then he also, the Department of Livestock used to be able to implement what they referred to as eminent domain, and they could trespass on any individual's property and just remove the bison from there and haze them back into the park. He made an order that unless there was an imminent threat, that means cows are in direct contact with bison, that could no longer take place. And so hundreds of residents, both in Gardner and in West Yellowstone, have our signs up that say, this is a buffalo safe zone, no hunting or trespassing allowed. And so that helps out. In November of 2014, we filed for an endangered species listing to try and get them federal protections. Ironically, the bureaucratic process that you have to go through to achieve such goals takes a minimum of 8 to 10 years for it to go through. I mean,
like
here
an
you have an
endangered species
animal
has that amount of time.
right. So we're in the final stages of that, and things are coming around. We've been doing some great work with the Department of Transportation, talking about and working on implementing some safe passage corridors, whether they're bridges or tunnels going across highways that are in major and
important.
and so it's inching its way, and I think our biggest achievement that we can't take claim for, but we have helped and assisted. Actually, our executive director was a heavy participant in making sure that Native Americans' treaty rights were recognized in the region. And I'm sure Dallas can actually go into this a bit better than I can, but and that's what we're trying to do is empower the people who have the longest history, who have love, respect, and reverence for these sacred species. And it's like we call ourselves environmentalists, and to them that's kind of a big joke because they've never not been environmentalists. They lived their way in harmony until we came over and disrupted everything. So that's what I believe down the road is going to be the catalyst to force change, because the Department of Livestock receives a minimum of $5,000 federal dollars every year to implement this program to basically kill any buffalo that dares to migrate outside of the park. And so that kind of money is never going to make them want to change. And so between our endangered species listing, the enactment of treaty rights and recognition of them is starting to work in the buffalo's advantage, so that we can start to look at this as a long-term solution and get 20 to 50 to 1 million buffalo back out on the landscape, treat them like the gift they are. And one thing that people don't talk about it often enough is the buffalo have the potential to really help us through this global warming crisis, because they re-heal the earth. They don't stay in overgraze area. They're constantly migrating. And in that process, they eat the grasses and spill the seeds. Their hoofs are shaped as such that they're tilled, and so when they walk, they re-till the soil. And then of course the magic fertilizer coming out the back end, and you have a perfect regeneration process. And so if we let the buffalo back on the landscape, they could bring the land to the carbon filter element that they all used to be, and that would help us in the big picture in that arena as well.
Oh, I'm glad you added the climate aspect in. If you're just joining us on Radio Free Georgia, this is In Tune to Nature. I'm host Carrie Freeman, talking with wildlife advocates Mike Mease and Dallas Gudgell from the Buffalo Field Campaign. Their website is buffalofieldcampaign.org, and it has petitions and action items on there and lots of great photos and videos. Dallas, can you tell us about the role the local Native Americans or First Nation tribes are playing in the bison protection, as Mike mentioned, and how their voices and leadership could be further incorporated?
Yeah, so a couple of things that come to mind is that Buffalo Field Campaign, as Mike has already stated, started out with tribal leadership, tribal vision, indigenous culture was involved, the spiritual connection that we have to bison. It's our Aboriginal food source. This is our relative, our four-legged relative that we've made time immemorial agreements with to take care of one another. They've given the ultimate sacrifice to take care of the native people by giving up their bodies. It's our job to then be reciprocal in that and to take care of them. And in the dominant culture, the host culture, the colonial mind is it's not conducive to living in harmony with nature. The colonial mind is an extraction mindset. It's a take mindset. These are resources, and for a long time there was the idea that these resources were never going to be depleted. And of course, it's very clear in recent years that this is not true. So I believe that going back to that idea of humility, reciprocity, the idea that the two-leggeds have relatives that have four legs and wings and roots and fins and are part of nature, and that the two-leggeds are also part of nature as opposed to separate from it. So that's a paradigm shift. In colonial terms, you'll hear it called coexistence, which I think is a really great thing to be promoting.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest bonus, I guess, of this traditional ecological knowledge. It's one, a lifestyle, a way of life. So our original lifeways are coming back. Our buffalo lifeways are coming back, and we need the buffalo to be able to do that. The second piece of it is that not only is it a context that Native people are coming from, that we need to change, and it would be a paradigm shift for the colonial mind. So there's a couple of things we can visibly see where that's taking place. One, Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland did an order earlier this year, Order 3410, which set aside $25 million to take a look at the possibility of tribal co-stewardship, tribal co-management with federal agencies of wild bison, particularly the wild bison herd in Yellowstone. So to that end, Buffalo Field Campaign, having started from native roots, is going back to native roots in a big way. We have 3 tribal members from 3 different tribes on the board. Our executive director is, or at least 2 on the board. Our executive director is Nez Perce, and we're interested in protections for the bison in any way possible, whether that's ESA protections. We've got a couple of things going on that we could potentially have protections for bison under the National Bison Legacy Act, add protections to that act that might look like, since bison is the national mammal, and National Bison Day is on November 4th every year, or the first Saturday of every November, adding protections to the National Bison Legacy Act would be a great cause. There's also another congressional act moving afoot that would protect other keystone species, bison, grizzly bears, and wolves,
Nice.
outside of the ESA provisions.
The Endangered
Species
Act. Yeah.
What's that? Yeah, the Endangered Species Act. And so those are all some really good, clear messages that says we recognize that traditional ecological knowledge is important. It's important in leadership. It's important in restoration of the bison, the buffalo, and moving forward. So one of the things we're doing as Buffalo Field Campaign is we're hosting on November 4th, Tribal Buffalo Summit. And so we're hoping to come out of the Buffalo Summit with some rough framework for what tribal co-stewardship might look like with the Park Service or the Forest Service. The wild bison should be roaming around on all 10 million acres that are in and surround the park. And that is what we're trying to do. It's the only species that's managed as livestock, only wild species that's managed as livestock. They should have the same rights as deer and elk to wander in and out of the park and go back into their traditional migratory ranges.
Well, I had no idea that they were managed as livestock, unlike how you would manage a wolf or a bear, that's pretty unfair to view them like as walking meat.
Well, I think that the other thing is they're the only animal that are not allowed to leave Yellowstone National Park without meeting a bullet or a capture facility. So it's that severe of prejudice held against this species.
Right. Well, we're going to need to wrap up, but Dallas and Mike, for listeners who are interested in helping to support wild bison's rights, what are some things they can do to help?
Well, first off, the one you missed of all, from November till the end of May, all you have to do is buy a plane ticket, get a bus ticket, and fly on up here to Montana, and we'll feed, clothe, and house you, and you can go out on the field and be part of our patrols and be a part of this. I know Montana sounds
many
intimidating.
Volunteers. Yeah.
We need them. We've over the years, we've had 6,500 volunteers come work in the field with us. Someone from every state in the United States, countries as far as Israel, Australia, all over Europe. And that's how we make a difference. And that also is the pride of my life, is that these people that come here, they learn how to be activists. They learn how to create change, and they go home and they start their own organizations and create change in their backyard. So it's a great way to learn and how to make change and be a part of something. But our website, always sign up for our weekly updates. We always have activities going on. There's petitions on there to help us with the safe passage, to sign up for our ESA, endangered species listing. There's a petition for that. Then, like you said, on our website, there's a plethora of ways you can help. And of course, the last one, stuck in this weird world of capitalism, we have to operate on donations as well. So we never say no to those either. Yeah. And I'm sure Dallas has
BuffaloFieldCampaign.org is the website.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I just want to say, on a personal note, my own decades of eating a vegan diet is part of my boycott of animal exploitation and persecution, both for domesticated and wild animals, as cattle ranchers have tended to be the cause of so much wildlife killing and restriction of rights for wildlife like bison for decades. So that's also just a part of what I try to do from here in Atlanta.
Well, we do not support factory farms. Any meat we eat is locally harvested and done in a sacred, good way. And so because we work with natives and that's their native diet, we keep it that way. But we do not support any factory farms, or, we stay away from supporting the cattle industry 100%.
Understood. Now, that's the end of our show, but I want to thank you, Dallas Gudgell and Mike Mease, for being with us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. Thanks for the work you and your team of volunteers at the Buffalo Field Campaign do to help non-human animal societies like bison be able to migrate and live their full lives free from human harm and persecution. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to In Tune to Nature, broadcasting every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, online at wrfg.org and on Atlanta radio station 89.3 FM. We post action items, news, and podcasts on the show's website, facebook.com/In Tune to Nature. The views and opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of WRFG, its board, staff, or volunteers. I'm one of those volunteers. I'm host Carrie Freeman, asking you to please support independent, non-commercial media like Radio Free Georgia. And remember to take care of yourself and others, including other species, like bison. Thank you for listening. Cheers.